Hello, I'm Asya Kostanyan from the Better Policy Project. Today, we will be discussing the latest publication of Not the Fed Tealbook, May 2023 edition. This publication is a regular release by the students of the Global Forecasting School, where we present our own analysis of the US economy a week before the Federal Reserve's decision. So it is 8 times a year. Our aim is to create different case scenarios to analyze the economy, the US economy, and address the 3 key questions of the FPAS scenario, which are the following. Where is the economy now? What are the underlying forces driving the economy? And how should the central bank adjust its instruments to achieve its policy objectives? Okay, so to accomplish this, we have developed our case A and case B scenarios. Actually, we have multiple videos on the Better Policy Project YouTube channel explaining what is an FPAS scenario, what is FPAS Mark 1, Mark 2, what is the Global Forecasting School, and so on. So I would recommend to visit our YouTube channel and check out our videos. Okay, so in case A, we have a scenario where the Federal Reserve, in this case, in general the central bank, needs to adopt a proactive stance. This means they would need to implement measures such as quantitative tightening and or rise interest rates to a higher extent than what the market anticipates. This approach is driven by the underlying economic and financial conditions that warrant a more assertive policy response. On the other hand, case B represents a scenario where the policymaking institution requires a different approach. In this case, the Fed or the policymaking institution should maintain the interest rate path below what the market expects. This strategy takes into account the prevailing conditions in the economy that suggest a more cautious and accommodative monetary policy approach if necessary. By developing these 2 distinct scenarios, we can explore different possibilities and evaluate the potential outcomes based on the underlying forces driving the economy. I will be taking you through the report, and we will go through all the analyses and the forecasts one by one. Okay, so in our analysis, we prioritize the examination of various indicators to assess the current state of the US economy. One significant figure we focus on is the non-Ponzi game conditions. And we have it in our Not the Tealbook's preamble. The concept of R minus G has gained prominence, particularly advocated by Olivier Blanchard in his recent book and his recent public speeches. Concerns have arisen as interest rates continue to rise, potentially leading to a positive R minus G in some countries. In the US, the gap between these 2 variables is expected to diminish further very soon, raising concerns about fiscal stability. We have dedicated a separate report to produce charts for multiple countries to observe the dynamics of R minus G, and we update this report daily. Okay. We are closely monitoring the ongoing discussions in the US Senate regarding the government debt ceiling, which has become a significant topic of the debate recently. Furthermore, our analysis encompasses the evaluation of financial fragility, which is closely linked to our understanding of risk scenarios in the US. The 2008 financial crisis was triggered by credit and asset bubbles, particularly the housing bubble. Therefore, we're assessing whether similar conditions exist currently, considering recent events in the US, such as the situation with regional and large banks in March of this year. It is indeed arguable that a significant bubble exists in the US economy, given the substantial increase of $43 trillion in the household balance sheets following the COVID-19 pandemic. This factor has had an impact on inflation in the US, and the high levels of excess savings held by US households continue to influence the real economy, consumption, and aggregate demand. While the effects of these high savings may be fading over time, they still persist and contribute to underlying inflationary pressures. Another concerning indicator is the inverted yield curve, which has persisted in the US for a considerable period already. Many economists view this as a potential signal of an upcoming recession. If we go down in the report, we will see a statement of the Mock Monetary Policy Committee. So we include this in each edition of the book, the Tealbook. And in this section, we provide our own recommendation on the Fed funds rate. In this particular case, our recommendation was to raise the rates by 25 basis points, which actually aligns with the Fed's decision in May. The Fed communicated its intention to analyze upcoming data before making further rate adjustments, signaling a data-dependent approach in the near future. As of now, it remains uncertain whether Fed will continue to raise rates or not. Okay. If we go further down, we start the section where we start answering to the question, the first question of FPAS scenario, which is where is the economy now? So, from a global perspective, several key aspects come into focus, such as China's economic growth, the ongoing war in the Ukraine, and commodity prices. China's resurgence after implementing non-zero COVID policies in January of this year has had a significant impact on global growth. As China resumes rapid economic expansion, it becomes a crucial factor contributing to overall global growth. The war in Ukraine, although less directly relevant to the US compared to other regions, still holds significance. Positive developments in the conflict could have broader implications for the global economy, including the US, albeit with a level of uncertainty in estimating the precise effects. Commodity prices, especially oil prices, have played a major role in influencing the US economy. Declining commodity prices including flexible prices, have contributed to a decrease in consumer price index, so the CPI inflation. This trend indicates a downward trajectory for CPI inflation in the US. Despite the challenging situation, underlying inflation and sticky price inflation have remained elevated, indicating persistent price pressures in the US economy. Shifting our focus back to the domestic economy of the US, the first quarter of 2023 saw GDP growth of 1.1%, which was lower than the expectations of most forecasters. The growth was primarily driven by decreasing inventories. Now, let's examine the current quarter using the Atlanta Fed GDP Now tracker, which is a reliable source for up-to-date information. Recently, the Atlanta Fed updated their GDP Now forecast based on the release of the retail trade data. Recently it was 2 days ago. Okay, initially they projected a GDP growth of 2.7%, but it has been revised slightly downwards to 2.6%. The retail trade numbers surprised analysts' expectations, which is noteworthy as there is a prevailing belief that policy hikes and high inflation would dampen consumer spending. However, positive surprises like the upside in retail trade suggest that the consumers are still actively participating in the economy. This observation strengthens our perspective that the probability of Case A type scenarios, which involve more proactive policy adjustments, is higher in the US compared to the Case B type scenarios. Indeed, the positive gap between actual GDP growth and potential growth indicates that the US economy is growing at a rate exceeding its estimated long-term capacity. Regarding bank lending conditions, it is crucial to consider them, especially within the context of the Case B scenario. Recent data from the publications of the Senior Loans Officer Survey, the BLT, the Bank Lending Tightening Indicator, shows that the conditions have tightened more, reaching 42%, according to the recent data that was published on May 8th. This implies that banks are tightening their policy conditions, which adds to the overall tightening measures in the economy, alongside the Fed's policy tightening. These actions are expected to contribute to the suppression of inflation through the transmission mechanism. However, the speed and effectiveness of this transmission process still carry a considerable level of uncertainty. Moving to the labor market, it has consistently surprised with positive news. Despite expectations of rising unemployment due to anticipated recessions, policy tightening and tightening credit conditions, the US still maintains historically low unemployment rates at 3.4%. Indeed, wage growth is a crucial factor to consider in understanding the dynamics of labor market and its impact on inflation. Currently, wage growth in the US remains robust, with figures ranging around 6 to 7%. This indicates wage growth for job switchers, which tends to be significantly higher compared to wage growth for job stayers. The presence of numerous job opportunities leads to greater demand for workers, allowing job switchers to negotiate and receive higher wages. This phenomenon of higher wage growth for job switchers contributes to a wage inflation spiral. It indicates that wage inflation is one of the primary factors driving persistent underlying inflation in the economy. As wages continue to rise, it creates a cycle where higher wages lead to increased purchasing power and consumption, subsequently impacting underlying inflation. It is worth noting that the wage growth data analyzed specifically focuses on the lowest quintile, representing individuals with the lowest salaries in the economy. Interestingly, their wage growth appears to be the highest. This upward trend in the wages for the lowest quintile translates into increased income for these individuals, enabling them to consume more. This in turn adds an additional upward pressure on underlying inflation. When analyzing inflation, it's valuable to consider both top-down and bottom-up approaches. The macroeconomic perspective provides a top-down view of how various factors in the economy can influence inflation. In the case of our analysis, the factors discussed earlier point towards a higher probability of case A scenarios rather than case B, unless a significant banking crisis occurs. On the other hand, taking a bottom-up approach allows us to examine the different components that contribute to inflation. Notably, shelter prices, used car prices, and medical services play significant roles. Shelter prices account for a substantial portion, around 34% of the US CPI, and are also part of the sticky price inflation, a significant part, by the way, and then they affect the underlying inflation. So far, there are no indications of a decline in shelter prices, suggesting they're persistent. Similarly, used car prices remain persistent as well. However, when looking at medical services, there are some signs of decline, as indicated by the yellow line in our analysis. To summarize our arguments, aggregate demand in the US is currently exceeding aggregate supply, indicating that the economy is growing above its potential. This imbalance contributes to the elevated underlying inflation. Several factors are driving the elevated underlying inflation, including wage inflation and the presence of excess savings held by households. The probability of case B type scenarios, which reflect conditions where interest rates remain lower than expected by the market, would increase if a financial or banking crisis occurs. Such a crisis would have a significant impact on the economy and could alter the interest rate trajectory. Market expectations for the Fed funds rate have been influenced by the occurrence of banking crises. As the crisis in March unfolded, expectations for interest rate hikes fluctuated, with some anticipating lower rates in response to the crisis, or no change in the rates in Fed funds rates. However, the Fed has communicated its commitment to addressing inflation and has implemented the rate increases in both April and May meetings, leading to revised market expectations for a higher interest rate path. In the case of scenario A, where the underlying inflation remains elevated, we argue that the Federal Reserve will need to raise interest rates again this year, possibly once or twice, in order to achieve its inflation targets. We expect that inflation, particularly the core PC inflation, will stay elevated above 4% and likely above 4.5% in the current and next quarters. Therefore, further actions by the Fed will be necessary to address the persistent inflationary pressures. In the case of scenario B, where a severe banking crisis occurs, the only plausible scenario where underlying inflation may decrease to around 3 or even 2.5% is if this crisis significantly impacts aggregate demand, leading to a recession towards the end of the year. In such a case, the Fed may consider lowering policy rates. The most severe scenario we have discussed involves a financial crisis similar to the global financial crisis of 2008. where there is even a probability of Fed returning to the effective lower bound within a forecastable future. For a comprehensive summary of assumptions and risk distributions, please refer to the appendix in our Not the Fed Tealbook, as well as the separate appendix containing details of the forecast of Case A and Case B. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to hearing your own analysis on the US economy.